My name is Michael, and I would like to tell you an experience. Supernatural that I had when I served in the Vietnam War, and that marked my life forever. Today I am 83 years old, and I have never. I forgot what I lived in that cursed place, I'll tell you. Since my childhood, I always dreamed of being a soldier, I thought. Such incredible soldiers. I remember it was my life's dream to grow up and have the honor of defending my country. My father was a veteran of the Second World War and also my idol and my mirror. I really wanted to be just like him. He told me to look for something else and not get into that life so as not to end up crippled like him. He had stepped on a mine about a year before the end of the war and lost his left leg and also his left hand. Apart from the after effects that remained from the explosion, I had lived through the dangers and evils of war, and I didn't want that to happen. Me, and neither to my brothers. Another boy with dreams won't listen to his old father, will he? And so, when I was old enough, I enlisted in the army, and for me, that was my biggest dream. I was really serving my country and defending the dream. American. The first year as a soldier, I had a lot of training and a lot of grading too. There was no room for laziness or soft body there. I learned to be a real man, even though my father didn't like the idea of me being in the military. I knew he was proud of me, even with all the difficulties that went through that first year. I got it, and soon I was firm inside. When you are a soldier, you creates a family inside the barracks. We weren't just colleagues there in uniforms, but friends who helped each other to overcome the challenges that they were taxes. But my intention here is not to tell my trajectory in the barracks and, yes, the experience I lived in the middle of the Vietnam War. Once the war started, I was no longer so new to the army, and I had 4 years serving. I was very excited to go because it was 4 years of training, and I had never set foot on a real combat field, and there I could put into practice everything I had trained before. So, when I arrived in Vietnam, the war was already going on around 2 months, and I arrived with my companions as reinforcements for the troops that were already in combat. I remember that when we arrived, we left for the action. As soon as I got off the plane, I went directed to a vehicle on a convoy along with a group of 11 soldiers who were in the same vehicle as me, and went towards the field of combat to help our allies who were suffering heavily pressure from the Viet Cong. It was my first time, and the sound of the camp battle shook my spirit. I didn't have time to think, so I got out of the vehicle. We went to the back line to provide support and then replace the soldiers who were on the front line at that time. I already knew what to do, and I did very well that day. I believe that I managed to take down 5 Viet Cong, and we managed to make them retreat their advancement. But even with the victory in that fight, I also saw the losses of war. So many men dead, so many American soldiers fallen. It was a hard and cruel scene to watch. Luckily, I wasn't hurt, even though I had exchanged fire on the front line. The passing of days in that place were the same. Every day we fought against them. Sometimes we won, sometimes not. I saw several colleagues dying on the battlefields, and there I realized what my father said about war was not a good thing, but I still felt alive. There, after all, that was my dream. I was serving my country. But there in that place I saw the horrible things that happen in war. I saw young people being slaughtered for being on the wrong side of the conflict. I saw people tortured, prisoners starved. The situation was really depressing and deplorable, things I would have thought they would be so cruel and brutal. I was afraid of getting caught. by the Viet Cong and end up like the prisoners of war we was slaughtering. One day a man from our army came back from a prison of our enemies, and he was severely tortured to the point of unable to speak or see because they had removed his tongue and pierced his eyes. It terrified me. I knew this was war things, but I didn't want to go through anything like that. The war continued until one of our aircraft was hit and crashed in a densely forested area, and I, along with 10 other soldiers, went designated to rescue the aircraft. One of them was named John, and he had served with me all these years in my region. We were good friends. So we drove in cars to the point where there was a way, and then we left the vehicles and continued on foot into the woods. There was no Viet Cong signs nearby, but at the same time I knew was in their territory and that at any moment could appear. They in the middle of the woods throwing us. We followed the instructions to try to find the place where the aircraft had crashed. After about 5 walking through the woods for hours, we finally managed to see the wreckage of the aircraft. It had collided with trees and was destroyed. Its pilot, we could not see it, so we would have to search in the area to come back with the complete report for our superiors. John told us to go away, that he didn't have good feeling about that place. That's when Mark, the soldier responsible for leading our group, scolded him and said that if he went he would like to be found alive, or that his family knew that we tried to find him. Soon we started looking for us surroundings to see if there were any leads on our pilot. One of the soldiers found a trail of blood going in one direction, so we started to follow to verify where these traces would go, and who knows how to find our pilot alive. After about half an hour of walking following those tracks, we found a kind of ruin of an ancient building. The tracks indicated that he had entered that place. He had fallen in the middle of the night of the previous day, so he should have looked for that place to shelter. When we entered, we saw that those ruins were the entrance of a big cave, but it was very strange. I remember well, on the walls of that place there were writings in a language that people don't know. Identified, there was a Vietnamite soldier in our group who spoke English, and he said that wasn't a good sign, that there were legends from ancient peoples about pagan rituals to sacrificial demons, human in places like these, that they offered people to entities in exchange for things they wanted, and he said that those scriptures were not in his language. As we advanced into that cave, we saw bones, skulls, and marks on the walls and floor. We found that very strange. The cave, it was quite big, and there were several paths inside to follow. We decided to split up into pairs to cover larger areas, and I went together with John. We chose a direction and headed to inside that sinister cave. Inside it was all dark, and we could only see where the flashlight illuminated. After about 5 minutes walking, we found our pilot, and I never forgot that image. We arrived in what looked like the end of the cave, and there he was, or what was left of him. His body was mangled. His torso was separated from its limbs, and torso were scarred with bites from a mandible, immense, as if something were feeding on it. Something very big thing. The image was very strong. Its legs we don't saw, and his head was far from his body. At the time, so much. John, we were very scared. We didn't know what it was and what that could have done this to him. That's when we went startled by the sounds of gunfire, so we ran back to find our comrades. Sounds other than gunfire began to having shouts from our men. Both me and John started to despair. Could it be that our enemies had surrounded us? Would that be our end? Before we return to the main path of the cave, there is silence. Took over everything. There were no more gunshots or screams, nothing. Only silence and darkness in front of us. That's when we heard sounds of something heavy approaching us. It wasn't a sound of a human. It was something heavy. It seemed to be big. John soon shot and the thing approached very fast. I couldn't identify it. It seemed a gorilla mixed with a giant bear, a very sinister thing. Our weapons had no effect, and soon that being came close. It was very quickly as it happened. He slammed John in front of me, and he smashed his head against the wall. I was in despair. What was it? That one? And why so brutal? He had killed my friend and my forward in seconds, and there was only me left. I started shooting at that thing that didn't seem to get hurt by my shots, and in a fraction of a second, I took a grenade that was with me. I pulled the pin before that monster found me. I remember that I was thrown away with the explosion. I hit my head on the floor of that place and got up quickly. I knew that my life was at great risk. I didn't see that monster, and I just ran towards the exit of that place. It was already night, and it's dark in the woods outside too. I remember I didn't stop running in the dark, and that by a miracle of the Lord. When I stopped running, passed out, woke up in an army medical tent. I was in severe pain and realized I had lost my wrist and hand, right, which I used to get the grenade. It didn't take long for them to ask me what had happened. Then I described everything in detail. My superiors said that no one had been found beyond me, and who did searches and more searches in the region, and they found nothing, not even traces of the crash of the aircraft. After that, I was discharged from the war because I had been mangled. I was retired like my father with less than 30 years of age. Until today, nobody knows what happened in that place or what. It was that thing that killed my mates a few years later. I met a Vietnamite who said he was an ancient legend of the region, and that it was very unlucky for us to have found that being, said to be a type, as guardian of the woods of that place, and that we were the invaders. To this day, at the end of my life, I am not satisfied with what happened that day, and I don't forget either. I lost a good friend and companions that night. It was hard to give news for John's family. I remember he had a wife and a whole life ahead of us. Not even their bodies were found, and I was the only survivor of that tragedy. In the report of their deaths, the army gave that he was in combat with enemies and that we had been ambushed. They would never assume that something unexplained killed those men. The army has this habit of hiding secrets. Even at the end of my life, I never found answers for that day. And I never forget either.